Good evening on this 3rd of November. This is your 28storms.com cyclone update. The tropics continue to be relatively quiet, but there are a couple of features on the maps today. The first one is this weak trough that's located over much of the northern territory, and as you will see on the radar and satellite, that is causing some periodic shower activity, but for the most part, the weather conditions are fairly quiet down here in the southern hemisphere, and there is also another front beginning to move into Western Australia. The latest afternoon infrared animation shows the blow-up of convective activity over portions of the Northern Territory and Queensland quite well. This should begin to wind down a little bit as we head into the evening hours, but on the water vapor you can see the reason why we are seeing a broad surface trough. It's being enhanced by a lot of these westerly winds coming across the continent, and here is yet another upper level low, and this is helping to usher in that second cold front that will try to make it into Western Australia over the next 1 to 2 days. On a more regional scale, you can easily make out that the Coral Sea, Arafura, and Timor Sea are relatively quiet, with that monsoon trough being mainly suppressed well deep into the tropics close to the equator. Meanwhile, the enhancing phase of the Madden-Julian Oscillation is beginning to work its way into the region. However, the MJO phase is beginning to weaken, and furthermore, since it's moving into the basin so early on in the cyclone season, it is unlikely to significantly enhance the probability of a tropical cyclone formation. Looking ahead over the next 5 to 7 days using the 0Z run of the ECMWF 500 millibar forecast, we can see the trough is beginning to push into Western Australia, and this continues all the way into Saturday. But notice here as we go into the middle part or early start of next week, this trough is going to amplify over Western Australia, and we could see a return of at least a little bit ridging across the Northern Territory and into the Timor Sea. So upper level winds may become slightly less hostile than what they have been, but that is just something we will have to monitor over the next week or so. Either way, it doesn't look like tropical cyclone formation is expected within the next 5 to 7 days. Furthermore, this is the latest 0Z GFS 200 to 850 millibar shear forecast, and we can see that the westerlies are still forecast to dominate much of the region throughout the forecast period. But as alluded to just a moment ago, it does look like the upper level conditions could become slightly more conducive near the top end as we go into the 5 to 7 day range. But even if this were to verify, this does not immediately signal that this is going to be a sign that tropical cyclogenesis is imminent. Elsewhere in the tropics, we're looking at the Arabian Sea, where Tropical Cyclone 3A made landfall in Yemen. This is a fairly rare event. In fact, I believe this is only the 7th tropical cyclone on record to make landfall in Yemen. This is just a quick look at the rain rates in millimeters as the center begins to move across the coastline. And on the latest visible image, you can make out that this tropical cyclone was very well defined as it began to make landfall. But the good news is that it looks as though the cyclone has lost some of its more significant convection, which is to be expected as it begins to move into a relatively drier air mass. And this is just another look at Tropical Cyclone 3A on a more regional scale. Of course, this is Yemen, Oman, and Saudi Arabia, where naturally the environment is very dry, and the system should just simply rain itself out over the next 24 to 48 hours. Last but not least, this is the GFS sea level pressure forecast for much of the Arabian Sea, and this is the current time, so you can make out Tropical Cyclone 3A right along the coast, and it should once again rain itself out here over the next couple of days. Now, one interesting feature of note is that the GFS is trying to keep the Arabian Sea above average in terms of activity throughout the forecast period. Notice that little low off the southern end of India, and it's forecast to move in a general west-northwest direction. And this model is hinting at the possibility of a second tropical cyclone formation just off the coast of Yemen as we go into days 5 through 7, but this is the only model doing so at this time. So overall, the tropics are quiet for now, but please keep it tuned to 28storms.com/cyclone for the latest information, and also our forecast partners over at westernpacificweather.com. Not only do they focus on weather across the Northwest Pacific, but also down into the Southern Hemisphere, close to Australia, especially once cyclone season really begins to ramp up.